Hello.
I never thought that one day I would find myself in this situation. My name is Thomas, and I have been married to Alice for almost 6 years now. We met at university, and everything seemed great from the first day we met. She was always my support, my inspiration, the one with whom I wanted to spend the rest of my life. But a few weeks ago, something changed. I began to notice small, almost imperceptible things. Alice became more withdrawn, her phone was always with her, and she was constantly receiving messages. I did not attach importance to it at first, but gradually I had suspicions. One evening I tried to talk to her about it. We were sitting at dinner and I asked bluntly, "Alice, are you cheating on me?" Her reaction surprised me. She froze for a moment, then began to speak slowly, avoiding my gaze. "Why do you ask that, Tom?" Her voice sounded nervous. She never spoke so slowly, as if choosing her words so as not to say something superfluous. I couldn't calm down. She works for a marketing company, and her job often involved traveling. But lately, her work trips have become too frequent. Or am I paying more attention to it? Her explanation sounded plausible, but there was something that bothered me. She began to avoid talking about our future, although we used to often discuss plans for a vacation or buying a new house. One day I asked her when we would plan our next trip. She smiled but quickly changed the subject. "Oh, I don't know, Tom. Maybe a little later. I'm so busy with work right now," she replied, turning the conversation to another topic. She began to avoid any conversation about our future together, and it really bothered me. I decided to share my suspicions with my friend Mike. Mike worked for a private detective agency and had extensive experience in investigating adultery. "Tom, I can help you," he said. "We can set up surveillance and find out what's really going on." I wasn't sure if I wanted to. Part of me hoped I was wrong, that it was just my paranoia, but at the same time I couldn't live with the unknown. I agreed. The next day, Mike and his team began surveillance. They installed hidden cameras in our house and Alice's car. They followed her movements, recorded her every step. I felt terrible. I felt like I was betraying her trust, but at the same time, I wanted to know the truth. The first few days, there was nothing suspicious. Alice went to work, came home, spent time with her friends. But one evening, Mike called me. "Tom, we noticed something interesting today," he said. "Alice was meeting a man at a cafe not far from her office. They talked, then got into her car and drove off together." I felt my heart tighten in my chest. "Are you sure it's something serious?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "I don't want to jump to conclusions." "Don't worry, Tom. We'll keep watching. Maybe it's just a colleague or a friend. But we'll find out," Mike reassured me. I couldn't find a place for myself. Every time I looked at Alice, I tried to decipher her expression, to find at least some hint that she was hiding something. She remained as friendly and caring as ever, but something in her demeanor had changed. One evening she went to the gym, but this time she didn't take her sports uniform with her. I asked her about it and she said she was just going to meet a friend. My heart began to beat faster. She never went to meetings unannounced, especially without a sports uniform. I knew that Mike and his team continued to monitor. I didn't want to show my wife that I suspected anything. I had to remain calm and careful, even if it seemed like a very difficult task. Even then, I understood that our journey was just beginning, and I could not predict the end of this story. After Mike informed me about Alice's meeting with the man, I began to notice even more details that I had previously ignored. Alice began to be late at work more often. Her explanations became less and less convincing. She said that there are many projects and deadlines at work, that their company is going through difficult times. But there was something strange in her voice, something I hadn't noticed before. Mike and his team continued to observe. They installed cameras not only in our house, but also near the house where Alice often spent time after work. They also monitored her movements in the city. I felt terrible, as if I was betraying her trust. But at the same time, I had to know the truth. One day Mike called me earlier than usual. "Tom, something happened today." His voice was serious. "Alice met up with the same man we saw her with earlier. They went into the restaurant together. I sent one of our men inside to record their conversation." My heart was beating twice as fast. I tried to stay calm, but it was almost impossible. "What are they doing there?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Nothing suspicious so far. They're just sitting there talking. But this man is being too familiar with her. He touched her hand several times and she didn't move away. I thought I could hear the world falling apart around me. Mike continued, "We'll continue to monitor. If anything else comes up, I'll let you know right away." A few hours later, Mike called again. "Tom, we need to meet," he said. "There's something you have to see for yourself." We agreed to meet in my office. When Mike walked in, he looked worried. He pulled out his laptop and showed me a video. It showed Alice and that man in the restaurant. They were sitting too close to each other. There was something more in his eyes than just friendly interest. As they left the restaurant, he put his arm around her shoulders and she didn't pull away. "That's not all," Mike continued. "We traced their path after the restaurant. They went to one of the hotels downtown. I felt the cold go through my whole body." "Hotel?" I barely squeezed out. Mike nodded. "Yes, but we can't be sure what was going on inside. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But if you want, we can find out more." I knew I had to do it. I agreed to follow up. Mike understood how difficult it was for me and promised to do everything possible to find out the truth. Meanwhile, Alice continued to act as if nothing had happened. She was just as friendly and affectionate, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between us. Every time she smiled, I felt like she wasn't the woman I married. I began to avoid her gaze. I could no longer look into her eyes. A few days later, Mike called again. "Tom, we managed to get some more information," he said. "This man Alice is seeing is called Jack. He works at the same company as her, but in a different department. We found some pictures of them together at corporate events." I felt my world start to fall apart even more. Jack, the name, was now stuck in my head, and every time I heard it, I felt a wave of rage and despair wash over me. I couldn't hold it in any longer. One evening, when Alice came home, I plucked up the courage to talk to her. "Alice, we need to talk," I said, trying not to show how worried I was. She looked surprised but remained calm as she sat down on the couch. "What happened, Tom?" she asked. I took a deep breath and decided to be honest. "I know about you and Jack," I said bluntly. "I know you're dating." Her face changed. She looked scared for a moment, but then quickly regained control. "What are you talking about?" she answered, trying to sound calm. "I know you were at a restaurant together," I continued, "and I know you went to the hotel." Alice was silent for a few seconds, looking at me. Then she sighed and seemed to decide to tell the truth. "Tom, it's not what you think," she began. "Jack is just a friend. He helps me with work." "Then why didn't you tell me about it before?" I asked, feeling the anger rising inside me. "I didn't mean to bother you," she replied. "You always worry so much about me." This explanation did not convince me. I felt she was still hiding something. I decided to continue my investigation. After that conversation with Alice, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I would see her restrained smile and her desperate attempts to convince me that everything was okay. But doubts had already settled in my heart, and they only grew stronger. I couldn't just sit there doing nothing. The next day, I decided I should talk to Mike again and ask him to investigate further. He agreed without hesitation and promised to be more careful. We both knew that I could no longer live in such obscurity. Meanwhile, I tried to behave with Alice as usual, although it was not easy. She continued to be kind and caring, but every time she left the room, I felt my heart sink. I couldn't shake the thought that she was leading a double life. One evening, when Alice was in the kitchen, her phone suddenly rang. She picked up the phone and left the room. I heard her speak in a soft, kind voice. I didn't need to know who it was. I already did. I decided not to show that I was eavesdropping. I was left sitting on the couch staring at the TV, unable to focus on any sound or image. A few minutes later, I heard Alice come back into the room, and we continued our evening as if nothing had happened. Later that evening, as I went to bed, Alice's phone suddenly rang. She must have forgotten to turn off the microphone after the conversation ended. I heard a man's voice, and he was familiar to me. It was Jack. "It was so easy," Jack said with a laugh. "He really believed your work stories. He has no idea we've been together this long." I felt my heart rate start to increase. My heart was beating so loud I could barely hear their voices, but I concentrated. Alice laughed back. "I know," she said. "Tom is such a gullible fool. He always believes anything I tell him. I don't even have to try. These words hit me like a hammer. I could feel the anger and humiliation rising inside me. How could she talk about me like that? We were married, we were supposed to be a team, partners, and here she, the woman I loved, was cheating on me with another man and laughing at me behind my back. "Do you think he'll ever figure it out?" asked Jack. "Not likely," she replied, laughing again. "He's so trusting. I can tell him anything and he'll believe it. I even love the game. It's so fun to see him trying to figure out what's going on without realizing that we already know all his moves." I could feel my face burning with rage. I was ready to explode, burst into the room and expose her. But instead, I forced myself to calm down and stay put. I wanted to hear more, to understand how far their relationship had come. Jack seemed to agree. "Well, it's time for me to go. We have another meeting scheduled tomorrow. Maybe again at the same hotel?" "Of course," Alice replied, and I heard her smile. "It's going to be fun." After that, the conversation stopped, and I heard Alice go back into the bedroom. She didn't even realize that I heard every word. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. She cheated on me, laughed at me, and felt no guilt about it. A wave of pain and rage washed over me. How could I be so blind? How could I have missed these signs before? I spent so many years building our life together, believing in our love, and now it all turned out to be a lie. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I decided it was time to act. The next morning I called Mike and told him what I had heard. He was shocked, but assured me that we would find a way out together. "Tom, I'll help you," he said. "We have to gather more evidence. But now we know what we're dealing with. It's not just suspicion, it's reality." I nodded even though Mike couldn't see it. I could feel determination rising within me. "I won't let them make a fool of me. I will learn the whole truth and do everything to protect myself." After that night, I couldn't look at Alice the same way. Her every movement seemed suspicious to me, every word a lie. She continued to act as if nothing had happened, but I could see her hiding her phone, carefully monitoring my mood. She must have sensed that something had changed, but probably thought I just needed time to calm down after our last conversation. I, however, was not going to stop. Mike and his team worked around the clock gathering evidence. We decided to take a radical step, to install additional hidden cameras and listening devices in our house. This would allow us to get all the information we needed, even if Alice and Jack decided to meet here. One evening, when Alice was on another meeting with Jack, I decided to check the camera footage. I wondered what she does when I'm not at home. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was using our house for her deceptions. I started going through the records and my worst fears were confirmed. In one of the videos, I saw Jack coming to our house when I wasn't there. They hugged in the hall, then went to our bedroom. My heart sank. I couldn't believe that everything was happening right under my nose in our own home. I felt a wave of anger and despair, but also a strange sense of relief. I finally had proof. Now I knew what I had to do. I decided not to tell Alice that I knew. I wanted to see how far she would go. Maybe she'll confess herself, or maybe I can gather even more evidence. The next day when Alice came home, I acted as if nothing had happened. She was smiling at me, pretending that everything was fine. I watched her, feeling the determination to expose her growing inside me. Later that day, her phone rang again. She picked up the phone and quickly left the room. I took advantage of the moment and decided to eavesdrop. I approached the door and heard her voice. She was talking to Jack, their voices low and muffled. "Tom doesn't suspect anything," she said. "He continues to believe in me. We can continue our meetings." Jack laughed. "He's an idiot," he said. "I can't believe he's so gullible. But it's good for us, right?" I felt a wave of rage rise inside me. They mocked me, laughed at my trust. My love for her turned into anger and resentment. I knew I couldn't take it anymore. I went back to my room and closed the door, trying to figure out what to do next. I called Mike and told him about the new evidence. "That's enough," I said. "I want us to prepare for the final step. I want her to know that I know. But I want it to happen in a way that leaves her with no doubt." Mike understood what I meant. We decided to arrange everything so that Alice and Jack were exposed together when they least expected it. This was to be the final act of our little play, and I was anxious to see how they would react. After talking with Mike, I started getting ready. I decided to pretend that I was going on a business trip for a few days. This should have opened the door for Alice and Jack to act openly. I left a note saying I'd be back in a few days and headed to the hotel where Mike was already waiting for me. We watched our house through the cameras, waiting for Alice and Jack to take advantage of this opportunity. And they didn't make us wait long. The next day they came together to our house. They thought that I had left, that they had nothing to fear. I stared at the monitor, feeling my heart beat faster with each passing second. They laughed, joked, behaved like lovers. They had no idea that their actions were being recorded, that I could see and hear their every step. When they went upstairs to our bedroom, I knew the moment had come. I called Mike. "The time has come," I said. We approached the house quietly and inconspicuously. I stayed behind, letting Mike and his team do their work. They entered the house, and I heard Alice and Jack start to panic when they realized we were there. I was the last to enter, slowly climbing the stairs to the bedroom. When I entered, Alice and Jack were standing there, looking confused and frightened. They didn't expect me to come back so early. "Tom, it's not what you think," Alice began, struggling to find the words. But I didn't want to hear her lies anymore. I raised my hand, stopping her. "I know everything," I said calmly. "I've heard your conversations. I've seen you together. Did you think I'd never find out? Did you think I was such a fool?" Her face paled and she fell silent. Jack stood nearby, looking equally shocked. "Now you both know what I know," I continued. "And now you can get out of my house. Forever." When Alice and Jack realized that their deception had been exposed, their faces instantly filled with shock and fear. They stood before me, defenseless, like two children caught in a trap. I felt a mixture of anger and pleasure beating inside me. I had been preparing for this moment for a long time, but now that it had arrived, I was not relieved, only deep, all-consuming pain. "Tom, let me explain," Alice began, her voice shaking. She looked scared, but at the same time determined, as if she was trying to find a way to my heart. But her words were empty for me. I couldn't believe her anymore. "Explain?" I could barely contain my anger. "What exactly do you want to explain? How long have you been cheating on me? How did you abuse me behind my back?" Jack, standing nearby, tried to interject. "Tom, I think we've all made mistakes here." I turned sharply to him. "Made mistakes?" I mockingly asked. "You think it's just a mistake? You think cheating is just a mistake? You're ruining a family, Jack. You're ruining my life." I couldn't control myself any longer. I was ready to explode, but Mike and his crew were there to hold me back. They knew I couldn't let anger cloud my mind. This situation should have been resolved differently. "Tom, please listen to me," Alice begged. "It wasn't what you think. I was lonely. You were always busy with work. And this is your refusal?" I interrupted her. "You felt lonely, so you decided to cheat on me? Do you know how that sounds?" Alice fell silent, not knowing what to say. She knew her words sounded silly. I could see she wanted to make excuses, but nothing she could say could change what happened. "You can both go," I finally said. "I don't want to see any of you again. Take your things and get out." Jack quickly realized that it was better not to argue. He took his jacket and slowly headed for the door. Alice stood still, looking devastated. "Tom, I didn't mean for this to happen," she said softly. "It doesn't matter anymore," I replied. "You made your choice, and now we have to live with the consequences." Alice took her things and followed Jack without looking at me. I stood still, feeling the pain rise inside me. I heard them close the door behind them, and the house fell silent. When they left, I sat on the bed and tried to collect my thoughts. My world was shattered, and I didn't know how to put it back together. I couldn't imagine what I would do next. It seemed to me that everything I believed was a lie. Mike entered the room and sat down next to me. "Tom, you made the right choice," he said. "You deserve better." I nodded, but Mike's words did not bring relief. "What should I do now?" I asked, not knowing who to turn to for advice. "You need to take time to think things through," he replied. "You have a right to anger, to hurt, but you also have a right to a new beginning." I knew Mike was right, but it seemed easier said than done. I had spent so many years building my life with Alice, and now it had all been destroyed in one moment. A few days after I exposed them, Alice tried to contact me. She left messages, wrote letters, but I did not answer. I couldn't listen to her excuses anymore. I was ready to start with a clean slate, even if it meant leaving everything behind. One day when I came home from work, I found her standing by the door. She looked exhausted and upset, and I could see she had been crying. "Tom, I came to apologize," she said as I opened the door. "I know I made a terrible mistake, but please give me a chance to make it right." I looked at her and felt everything inside me tighten. "Fix it?" I repeated. "How can you fix this, Alice? How can you restore the trust you've broken?" She sighed and lowered her head. "I know it's going to be hard, but I'm ready to do my best. I'm ready to go to therapy, change my behavior, do whatever it takes. Just give me a chance." I didn't know what to say. A part of me still loved her, still wanted to believe that she could change. But another part of me knew that it would be very difficult, maybe impossible. "I can't promise you anything, Alice," I finally said. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, but I'm willing to try. One last chance." Alice nodded, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Thank you, Tom," she whispered. "I promise I'll do my best to fix it." We started going to couples therapy, trying to figure out if we could save our marriage. But deep down, I knew it would be a tough fight. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and once it's broken, it's very difficult to rebuild. Each session was full of pain and emotions. We discussed our problems, talked about our feelings, tried to find a way to reconcile. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something would always be wrong. One evening, after another session, I asked her directly, "Alice, why did you do this? Why did you betray me?" She looked at me and said quietly, "I don't know, Tom. Maybe I was weak. Maybe I was looking for something I couldn't find with us. But I know one thing. I regret it more than anything in the world." These words were painful, but at the same time liberating. I knew we had both made mistakes, but now I was ready to move forward. I didn't know if we could save our marriage, but I was willing to try. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Therapy became a weekly routine for us, a kind of broken relationship game that we both tried to win. I couldn't say that it brought me relief, but there was a certain sense of justice. Alice seemed sincere in her efforts to change, but I still felt broken. We were sitting in the office of our therapist, Mary, for another session. Mary was a patient woman with kind eyes that seemed to see everything. She understood our feelings, but she also knew that not every marriage can be saved. "Tom," she began softly, "I know it's hard for you. Trust is the foundation of any relationship. Do you think you can ever trust Alice again?" I thought before answering. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Every time I look at her, I remember what happened. I remember the pain she caused me." Alice sat beside her with her head bowed. I could see she was embarrassed. But was that enough? Can shame bring back what was lost? "We are working on it," she added, "but I can't forget. And I don't know if I ever will." Mary nodded in understanding. "That's fine, Tom. But you have to decide if you're willing to continue working on this relationship or if it's better for both of you to move on." I didn't know the answer. I was torn between the love I once felt for Alice and the anger at her betrayal. We continued to attend therapy for a few more weeks, but I felt like every step forward was accompanied by 2 steps back. One evening, when we got home from a session, I decided it was time to have a serious talk. We sat down at the kitchen table and I looked into her eyes. "Alice," I began, "I can't go on like this anymore. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, and I'm not sure I want to keep trying. Maybe we should break up." She looked devastated. "Tom, please give me another chance," she begged. "I know I hurt you, but I'm willing to do anything to make it right." I sighed, feeling conflicting feelings struggle within me. "I've given you plenty of chances, Alice," I replied, "but this time, I think I need to think about myself." She was silent, and we sat in silence for a few minutes while I considered my words. I knew it wouldn't be an easy decision, but I also knew it was necessary. The next morning, I called Mike and told him about my decision. He has been my support throughout this nightmare, and I felt I needed to share my thoughts with him. "I think that's right, Tom," he said. "You deserve better. You deserve happiness." I agreed with him, but part of me still doubted. Maybe I was just scared of the unknown, of what awaits me after the divorce. I was afraid to be left alone, to start everything from scratch. Over the next few days, Alice tried to talk to me, but I avoided those conversations. I knew I needed to take time to think things through before making a final decision. One day I decided to go to my parents. I needed a break. I needed to be away from Alice in our house filled with memories and pain. My parents have always been my support, and I knew they would be able to give me wise advice. My mother met me at the door with a sympathetic look. She knew that I was worried, and without saying a word, she hugged me. We sat down in the kitchen, and I told her everything that had happened. "Tom, my dear," she said, putting her hand on my shoulder, "sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you have to know when to let go." My father nodded in agreement with her. "You are strong, son," he said. "You will survive this, and you will find someone who will appreciate you and your trust." Their words gave me new confidence. Maybe divorce wasn't the worst option. Maybe it was a chance for a new beginning, for a new life. When I got home, I found Alice in the kitchen. She sat at the table, looking exhausted and devastated. "Tom," she began as I walked into the room, "I understand you want a divorce, and if that's what you need, I'm ready to go." I looked at her and felt a wave of relief. Perhaps she also realized that our married life cannot be the same as before. "Thank you for understanding," I said. "I think it will be better for both of us." We decided to part peacefully, without unnecessary conflicts and dramas. We both knew that this marriage could not be saved, and it was better to separate now than continue to torment each other. Shortly after that, we filed for divorce. I moved to another place, trying to start from scratch. It was hard, but I knew it was necessary. I haven't seen Alice since our divorce. She sent me several messages, but I chose not to reply. I knew I needed to move forward, leave the past behind. A few months after the divorce, I started to feel better. I found a new job, made new friends. I realized that life goes on even when everything seems to be falling apart. One day I received a letter from Alice. She wrote that she regrets everything that happened and hopes that I will find happiness. I didn't answer, but I felt that I could finally forgive her, not for her, but for myself. I realized that holding on to pain and resentment is like carrying a burden that prevents you from moving forward. And I was ready to let go of this burden, to be free. After the divorce, life slowly returned to normal. I felt again how the air became lighter, how the sunlight no longer burned my eyes, and every day brought new opportunities. I focused on my work, found hobbies that helped distract me, and started spending time with friends again. It was hard for me to admit to myself that I still missed Alice. Despite her betrayal, she has been a part of my life for many years. She was my partner, my companion, and even when everything fell apart, I couldn't just throw those memories out of my heart. However, I knew I had to move on, and every day it got a little easier. One morning, while jogging in the park, I met a woman named Sarah. She seemed familiar to me, and when we started talking, it turned out that we both work in the same building, but in different departments. We stopped and talked for a few minutes, and I felt surprisingly comfortable. She was intelligent, interesting, and had a genuine smile that charmed at first sight. We began to see each other more often, random meetings on runs, lunches together, and then dinners. Sarah was not like Alice. She was different, and that difference was refreshing. She didn't try to hide her emotions or be someone she wasn't. She was real, and that appealed to me. One evening, while we were sitting in a small restaurant not far from my new apartment, I decided to tell her everything that had happened with Alice. It was difficult for me, but I knew that if I wanted to start a new relationship, I had to be honest. Sarah listened to me carefully without interrupting. Her face showed no condemnation or sympathy, only understanding. When I finished, she just took my hand and said, "Tom, I don't know what I would do if I were you, but I think you did your best, and now you have a chance to start over." These words penetrated the very heart. I realized she was right. My past does not determine my future. I could be happy again. I could love and trust again. We continued to meet, and over time, our relationship grew stronger. Sarah didn't try to change me, and I didn't try to change her. We were just two people who found each other at the right moment in life. She helped me understand that love can be honest and simple, without lies and betrayal. A few months later, we decided to move into a new apartment together. It was a new step for both of us, but I felt it was the right decision. We were ready to start a new chapter of our lives together. One day I received another letter from Alice. She wrote that she had found a job in another city and that she wanted to start a new life. She thanked me for all the years we spent together and apologized once again for everything that had happened. I read this letter and felt that the moment had come to close this chapter for good. I answered her briefly, wishing her all the best in her new life. I no longer felt anger or pain, only peace. I was ready to let her go in the past. When I shared the news with Sarah, she just smiled and said, "I'm glad you can move on, Tom. You deserve to be happy." With her by my side, I felt free and happy. I was no longer tormented by doubts or fears. I knew we were building something new, something real. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of our new apartment watching the sunset, I turned to Sarah and said, "Thank you for everything." She looked at me in surprise. "For what?" "Because you came into my life," I answered, "for helping me find myself again." Sarah took my hand and squeezed it. "You did it yourself, Tom. I was just here by your side." And in that moment, I realized that I had indeed found a new beginning. I knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but now I was ready for them. I felt like everything was going to be okay because I was finally on the right track. My past with Alice left scars, but I was ready to leave those scars behind. I was ready to build a new life with Sarah, and I knew that together we could overcome anything. I looked at the horizon where the sun was slowly setting, and I felt the peace fill me. This was my new beginning, and I was ready to embrace it with all that it would bring.
Bye bye.